Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the March instalment of our Empowerment at Home Energy Efficiency Webinars for Change. This month we'll be talking all about solar. So please welcome Daniel and Debbie, our solar projects co-managers here at Selce. For people who don't know, Selce stands for South East London Community Energy, a community energy cooperative that was founded in 2014 by local people who wanted to see localised climate action and work together for a cleaner, fairer future. These webinars are a part of our Future Fit Homes project, which is a project we're supporting people to access available discounts and grants, and then the rest of the community through Selce as well with all of our associated projects. I'll share some links at the end of the session to learn a bit more about our projects.
Amazing.
Debbie and Daniel, please do take it away.
Cool, will do. Thank you, Amy. We'll share my screen now. Yeah, and as Amy said, I'm Daniel Beaton, the one of the solar projects co-managers here at Selce. And I'll be doing the lion's share of the talking today because Debbie's voice is a little bit worse for wear. But Debbie will be manning the chat and having a look at the questions and answering things in there and bringing things to attention and filling in where I've missed anything. Thanks so much for coming along, everyone. This is going to be really great. And maybe just as we start, and Debbie and I might intro ourselves and our kind of background. If everyone wants to maybe just pop in from a rating of 1 to 10, where you kind of think your solar knowledge is. Like 1 kind of knowing that the sun comes up and goes down, and 10 being you install solar on roofs every day of the week. And then maybe we can tailor a bit of the session. Yeah, because it was very much billed as a whistle-stop tour, and I mean Debbie and I can talk about solar for hours and hours, so trying to compress it down, yeah, it's going to be impressive for us. So yeah, I'm Daniel Beaton. You might hear from my accent. Originally from Australia. I've been working in kind of community energy and renewables and solar space for 5, 6, 7 years now. And I guess in 2020 and 2021, back in Australia, I installed 6.2 kilowatts of solar on my house. Took the house totally off gas, so it's all electric, with heat pump, hot water, reverse cycle air conditioning, and made it really efficient, which was nice. And then promptly moved away to England, so I can't really enjoy it anymore, which is a shame. But it's still there, ticking away, doing good stuff. Now, Debbie, how about you introduce yourself if your voice will allow?
Evening, everyone. I don't normally sound this husky, and hopefully the words will last a little bit longer. But thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I have about 17 years experience, both in solar thermal and solar PV, and I'm a qualified energy efficiency professional, as well as being a Green Star member for the Green Building Council. So quite an array of information, and hopefully you can utilize our knowledge and get the most out of it for yourselves tonight.
Nice one. Thanks, Debbie. And I might just quickly outline what we're going to go through in the session. So firstly, just very, very simply, yeah, why would someone go solar? How does solar really work? Then we'll look a bit more into the main components, which are the panels and the inverter, and then the third main component being the installation itself. And then we'll look a bit more at the planning, regulation, and some stuff about financing opportunities, and where to go from here. All right. So I just thought before we launch into speaking all about solar, we might talk not about solar and just about energy in general and energy efficiency. Because basically when we're looking into solar power, we really need to know what our consumption is before knowing how to reduce our consumption or how much solar we actually need to offset what we're using. And sometimes bills can be a bit confusing. You might have different billing periods that might change from 1 month or 1 quarter to the next. So really we really need to understand how much power you're using over a period, whether that's a day, a month, a year, depends what you want to be looking at. And then really how much you're paying for power per kilowatt hour, which is the unit rate you'll see everywhere. And a lot of the time, this is an example bill here. A lot of the time you will see a day rate and a nighttime rate. And with solar power, the sun's shining during the day, you're really just looking at cutting down on that daytime usage. So you'll be looking at saving that power per kilowatt for your daytime usage. So it's just always good to, when you're looking at your bills, because you and whoever you get a quote from, you'll be looking at this together and then matching a solar system to your house's needs. And we'll go through how we do that here on out. And then just look,
Daniel,
yes.
sorry, won't you put your slides on presentation mode?
Oh, I thought I
Just,
did. Okay.
no,
Oh,
thanks.
oh, look at that.
There we
Beautiful.
go.
Oh,
Thank
amazing. Okay, great. And then just also on energy, I wanted to touch on the idea of the energy efficiency hierarchy, and that generating your own, I guess, free power from your own roof is amazing, but it is kind of one in a host of things that we can do in the home. And there are a lot of things to do to kind of reduce your energy and make your home more efficient, that are cheaper, faster, and yeah, have kind of a bigger bang for buck than just smacking on a whole bunch of solar and overcapitalizing, which I maybe did in my previous experience. I would have probably done things differently. But yeah, there are things like draft sealing and insulating and looking at your windows and kind of getting your building as efficient as you can, and then kind of matching a solar system to that reduced overall consumption instead of having to go really massive on the solar system itself, which can be quite expensive. Okay. So how and why solar works in 3 minutes. Let's see if I can do it in 3 minutes. This is a whistle stop indeed. So over here on the right, I put in a photo of just of a generic household system, and things have actually updated a bit since here, and I'll show that. I'll explain a bit how solar works very quickly, and then kind of why people get solar, and then some additional benefits to think about as well. So basically, you can't see it here, but we have the sun. During the day, the sun fires out photons at the planet. The photons excite the electrons in the silicon in your solar panels, and those electrons get really excited and they float along into a thing called direct current, i.e. DC, and that's the DC out of your AC and DC electricity. And if you can see my cursor on my mouse, your DC cabling will go from your roof all the way down through an isolator for safety into a thing called your inverter. An inverter is kind of the brains of your solar system, and it's a kind of a backpack or microwave-sized box that sits on the wall of your house, in your garage or outside, and that it monitors the electricity, conditions it, and turns it from DC power into AC power at 240 volts that your house can actually use. Now on this graph, you can see it goes through another isolator for safety, which is great. And then back in the day of the feed-in tariff, everyone needed to have a generation meter attached. That's no longer the case because we now have the smart export guarantee instead, which is something we'll talk about. So that's no longer a necessary part of the system. Some people may still install them anyway. That being said, your AC power then goes into your consumer unit at your property, and then the first port of call for any power being generated is your house. So it doesn't get exported to the grid and you buy it back or anything like that. Anything that your house can possibly use at the time and draw, it will draw it first and foremost from the solar, and you don't need to worry about that or manage that. It does that automatically. And then anything else additional or anything at nighttime will just come through your retail electricity meter as normal. And then your meter as well. If you're getting solar, whether you have a smart meter or not, we'll measure that export, and we'll talk about how that works as well. Great. There's probably going to be a bit more than 3 minutes, but yeah, the two ways that solar saves you money is quite obvious. Is first and foremost is offsetting the power that you're buying for the grid. So every time you're using a kilowatt hour of your own free energy from your solar, that's a kilowatt hour you're not buying from a retailer that's a fossil fuel, basically. And we can look at how you calculate that for your own property in a bit. And then, as I mentioned before, you also get paid or can get paid for any additional energy that you're not using that gets sold through your meter out to the grid. And you'll need to sign up to a retailer that can handle that. There's many of them can, and we can talk about that near the end. But those are the main two ways that you save money from solar. And then that clean power is then also reducing your carbon emissions, which is what I'm personally most keen about. And then I guess just additionally, other benefits of solar being energy independence and kind of insulating yourself from the volatilities of the crazy future world that is rapidly approaching, and future energy price rises and shocks because of wars and whatever else, as we've obviously seen in the last few years, which has been quite interesting. I might add, just before I go any further, that there's going to be lots of kind of calculations and photos and links and resources in this presentation. If you want to take notes, great, but we will circulate this presentation afterwards as kind of a resource pack that you can then use and hang on to and refer back to, so don't feel like you need to take notes throughout or anything like that. Okay, cool. So we kind of have an understanding now of how a solar system would work for your roof. Now let's chat about solar panels themselves, or solar modules. Just as a bit of a crash course, so you know what you're talking about and what to look for when you're chatting to installers and you're looking at quotes. So basically, solar panels are kind of do vary a bit in size, but basically they're about 1 meter by 1.6 to 2 meters, depending on their wattage and the manufacturer. And the average power per panel is measured in watts. And in the market right now, you're kind of looking at per panel, their rated output at 400 or 600 watts per panel. And kind of obviously, the more you stack along your roof, the more that just adds up in a direct fashion. And they're all usually linked in series. If you're looking at solar panels in your different quotes, really ideally you're looking for a panel that has a 20 to 25-year product warranty. So that is on the actual physical product itself. So if anything wrong happens to the panel, is faulty, that the manufacturer themselves will replace that within that period, which is great. And then you'll also see on any solar panels a thing called a performance warranty. And it used to kind of be that this was always a flat 20 years. But recently this has kind of gone up to 25 to 30 years. And a performance warranty is kind of a guaranteed output from the panels after that period. So a performance warranty of 25 years will generally mean, if you look at the paperwork, that after 25 years, they'll be generating 80% of that output that they were at year 1, which is pretty good. And then if you slightly, and I guess middle of the market panels, you're looking at 10 to 12 years for the product warranty and 25 years for the performance warranty. Anything less than that, I'd absolutely run for the hills, and probably don't worry about it. We've jotted down here kind of a handful of like kind of the biggest and best well-regarded module manufacturers that are available in the UK. So if you're talking to any contractors and they've quoted you for these panels, it's generally a safe bet. That's pretty much as good as it gets in the market. There are obviously others, and I've just put an example over here. Yeah, a whole bunch of different companies. These lists of model manufacturers of the year, they're vying for different places and they change every year. But these manufacturers over here are generally, for the last 10, 15 years, have been the top makers of modules. Okay, so we're going to go on now from modules and panels into the inverter. Okay, so as I said before, your inverter is kind of the brains of your system, and will usually, but not always, have a screen on it, and will usually also have a mobile connected app that your installer will connect for free for you, that will show you if it's working, if there are any faults, how much your system's generating, and will also save data in there so you can look at your weekly usage and annual usage and things like that. So this really is your one and only, well, not one and only, but your main reference point for your interface for your solar system is the inverter, and you have to have one. And it is the main part of your system. Because they work quite hard, they normally last for about 10 or 15 years, whereas your solar system and the panels will last for 25, 30 warranted and might last another 10 years after that. So something to think about when you're installing solar is that after 10 years, probably sometime between 10 to 15 years, you will need to replace your inverter. And that will be £1,000 or £2,000 probably for a domestic inverter that you will then need to pay again if you want to keep going. It's also a good opportunity when these things happen to kind of reassess what's happening in the market. You might want to get an electric vehicle then, or battery storage. or put some more panels on an extension or things like that, you know. So it's a good time to sometimes plan for a bit of obsolescence, and kind of make sure that when it does go, that you're ready to install something else and really make the most out of your solar. Because sometimes people's inverters die even in year 1 or 2, and they don't look at their system, and then 5 years later they realize that solar hasn't been working the entire time, which is not good. Again, Debs and I put together a list of basically the most highly regarded inverter manufacturers that you will likely see out there when you're getting quotes from people. Yeah, so if you're looking at this list, you're generally good to go. And
Daniel, if I
yes,
may just, Helen's
please.
asked obviously about the monitoring application that comes with the different inverters.
Yes.
Helen, yes, they would prefer to use Wi-Fi. Obviously, if Wi-Fi is not available, you do get inverters that have a dongle that would come with a data plan. If you are having solar installed, be conscious of your Wi-Fi signal. If you put in your inverter in the garage, you may need to ensure that you have a booster available for the installers or to run a direct cable. So just bear that in mind too.
Yeah. I mean, an Ethernet cable would be ideal if that's feasible in your situation. On my system at home in Australia, I actually have a kind of a third-party additional meter that that monitors my consumption as well as my production, and I have kind of my air conditioning unit on its own circuit, so I can kind of see how the solar and the air conditioner all works. But that has actually gone offline in the last few months, and my tenants aren't being very helpful in getting that back online, so I don't actually have any visibility on what's happening with the system at the moment. So yeah, monitoring is important to kind of stay on top of. I put this one other note down the bottom. It says you'll need a hybrid inverter if you are considering battery storage. Yeah, so if you're thinking about getting an electric vehicle or getting some batteries as well, we're probably not going to talk very much about batteries in this session unless anyone has a burning question about it. But talk to your contractors, and if that's something you're thinking about in the next few years, get a hybrid inverter that you can then plug a battery into. Or go with a Tesla inverter that has that all built in it already. Not that we're super pro Tesla at the moment, but there you go. Also, Debbie, I might just mention that in this view that I'm looking at, I can't actually see the chat or the questions. So feel free just to butt in whenever, because I'm kind of flying blind over here. Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Okay, so we've looked at our panels, we've looked at how inverters work. Now I thought it would be good to kind of look at how that translates into each of our individual houses and homes and our usage, and kind of everyone has their own different roof, different materials. Yeah. So I thought we could chat about that now, through a few different subheadings. So firstly was about sizing. How do you size the system for your place? Do you need 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts, that kind of thing? So generally you're looking to match your daytime usage with your solar system, and kind of to cover off as much of your daytime usage as humanly possible. But the biggest constraint being the size of your roof. And around Southeast London, your biggest constraint is probably going to be how much available and uninterrupted roof space you have. You can see down here in these photos on the right, this is just a little mock-up I did in some solar software that we have. And this is just a random street in Greenwich. There's some nice south-facing roofs. And here you could, I think in this photo, this is about eight panels. And that's quite lucky to fit that many on in this kind of area. So really, in terms of sizing, most people, I think, will probably be using around 8, 9, 10 kilowatt hours a day. And if they say half of that is daytime, maybe looking at a system that generates 5 kilowatt hours a day, which is something like a 2 or 3 kilowatt solar system, would do you fine. But again, your contractors will chat you through all of this, and we're going to step through a little exercise in a second on how we can kind of work that out and then look at our savings. So I have this note here, go big. What do I mean by go big when it comes to sizing? So this is my conventional wisdom, but I think it kind of holds that if you're putting in a solar system, the cost of the actual modules themselves, when it comes to the overall cost of your scaffolding and your installer's labor and the inverter and everything else, the marginal cost of adding 1 or 2 extra panels, an extra half kilowatt, extra kilowatt or 2, really isn't that much if you can afford it, or you have, or if you're financing the system through a mortgage or something. That if you're there and you're doing it, really to future-proof your home for kind of, I guess, the energy transition and getting away from gas towards going all electric, while they're there, while they're doing it, really put on as much as you can on your roof, and obviously as much as the DNO, the distributor will allow. And we'll talk about kind of your obligations for putting in applications to the DNO in a bit. But yeah, my conventional wisdom is go as big as you can afford, because it will just give you so much more flexibility in the future. And studies actually, most of them show that the payback period is just as good, or not better, regardless of how much power you're actually using. So something to think about. Okay, generation. So this is a figure for London, which is really depends on how your system is installed, whether just completely facing south or whether you have some panels on the east and the west and the tilt of your roof. But basically, in general, you take this figure as read, that in general, for every 1 kilowatt of solar you install, so let's say 2 500-watt panels, that will generate 2.2 kilowatt hours of power every day on average. Now, that is an average, of course, and if you look over here on the right, here's 2 kind of models of generation. The top one being 2 different days in July, one being very sunny, and you can see from the morning, following my mouse, it goes up and up and up, and just very smooth generation throughout the day, peaking around lunchtime and then back down. And now this other day in July, you can see here is obviously was a cloudy day, because the clouds coming in and out and in and out, and the solar system generation is responding to that. So day-to-day weather obviously impacts it. And then below, you can see here, this is your annual generation. So as you can assume, solar generates more than twice as much in summer as it does in winter. And that's also something to think about. Also kind of why going big is quite good, because if you're using electric heating and using a lot of electric appliances in the wintertime, your generation is going to be a lot less. So really putting on as much solar as you can, or looking at a battery as well, would be another way to go. Okay, moving on to orientation. So yes, I think conventional wisdom, everyone would assume that ideally south-facing solar panels are the best solar panels. And I guess technically that is true. And if you're lucky enough to have a beautiful uninterrupted southern pitched roof, then good for you. That sounds very nice. You should fill it up with as much solar as you can. However, that's not necessarily the case for everyone, and I would not be afraid to look at putting solar panels on the east and on the west of your house as well, or instead of. Over a year, you'll end up generating about 15 to 20% less power overall than just strictly south-facing panels. However, because your morning panels here facing east will actually get a lot more sunlight and produce more energy earlier in the morning when you're getting up and making breakfast and tea and whatever before you go out to work. And then throughout the day when you're out, that's generating less. This is all averages, of course. And then in the evening time when you get home from work and you're cooking dinner and having the oven on, you're actually generating more out into the evening, especially in summertime, than you would be from just south-facing panels. So for a lot of people, east-west is just as good. And most standard inverters, I should have mentioned before, are called string inverters, which means you can have 2 strings of panels in your setup. So you can have 1 string east and 1 string west. Okay. Now, obviously your roofing material is super important, and people have very differing degrees of quality of their roof. I have a note down here saying forward planning. if you're going to have your solar panels on the roof for 25, 30 years, it's probably good to do your due diligence and kind of think about, are you planning on doing any insulating works or new sarking or replacing the roof in the next 10 years or more, and really make sure that, yeah, that your roof is up to it and structurally up to it. You may want to get a structural report, although your installer, a good installer, will be able to advise on that. Slate is quite challenging for installers and will cost you more. And it will be we'll talk about this in a bit, but yeah, it's really good to vet your installers about their experience with slate, and also are they planning on drilling through your tiles? What kind of flashings are they putting underneath? Because you don't really want them to come back again, because it can get quite expensive even if under warranty. So yeah, you can install solar on pretty much every roofing system. I guess another thing just to bear in mind, that if you have a flat roof with some kind of roof felting situation, that generally needs to get replaced or re-waterproofed every 10, 15 years. So you may want to look at a non-penetrating system of mounting that's ballasted with weights to the roof, so it's a bit easier to take off, re-waterproof, and stack the panels up on the side and then put them back on. So there's obviously some future proofing and future planning to think about. Now I have a note in here for inverter pairing. You don't really need to know about this, but it's just kind of good to be aware of that your inverter will be matched. Inverters come in a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. So one company will make a 2 kilowatt, a 2.6, a 3, a 4, a 5, all the way up. And really your inverter size needs to be paired to your solar install capacity. But you will often see, and this confuses people sometimes, and this is why I mentioned it, that your solar capacity of solar panels is a bit bigger than the inverter capacity, and then people get a bit confused. They're like, oh, this installer doesn't know what they're talking about. So basically, I'm just saying here that ideal sizing of your solar is up to 130% of the inverter size. So for example, a 2 kilowatt inverter, it's actually ideal to have about 2.6 kilowatts of solar installed, because your solar is rarely working at full capacity, and the closer it is at its kind of 75, 80% capacity, the closer it's matched to your inverter rating, is actually your system will work more efficiently throughout the year. So that's why they do that. So if you see a mismatch there on your quotes, there's not a mistake. Okay, I spoke about now mounting, also super important. Really get an idea and a sense and be comfortable with your installer on how they're planning on mounting the system to your roof. Most of the time, most properties in Southeast London have some kind of tile roof. What will happen is the installers will be up on the roof, they will lift up the tiles, mount a bracket to the battens and the structural wood underneath, with a flashing or not, and then place the tiles back down on top, and they shouldn't be drilling through the tiles. And therefore all your waterproofing stays the same, which is great. One thing to be wary of though is that they will invariably probably break up to 10, 15 tiles, depending on how old and brittle your tiles are. So really good idea to have some tiles there spare on the day so that they can put them in instead of having to come back, and so you don't have a hole in your roof.
Daniel, just another
yes.
note on that. When
Yes.
they are working with your tiles and putting them back, they will grind them, which is what they should be doing. If they're not grinding your tiles, you're going to end up with a tile that is not sitting flush, and that's where water penetration will happen. So don't get shocked if you hear a grinder on your roof.
Yeah, you should be shocked if you don't hear it. Yeah, and then some kind of scaffolding unless you're incredibly lucky and have a kind of a balcony, a nice walk-in balcony that you can then hop up onto the roof with a ladder. You most likely have some kind of scaffolding and edge protection as part of the quote, for the safety of the installers, and that's a good thing. Yeah, and this note down the bottom again about forward planning, that also goes back to your inverter. Debs and I were talking about this earlier. Really, since solar is such a kind of a long-term thing, if you're planning on, having more having more people in the home, or putting on an extension or renovation or another story, or getting off gas and going all electric and getting an EV, and you might want more solar in the future, you can actually get a bit of a bigger inverter now, and then once, let's say, you put on the extension, you can pop another array up there and keep the same inverter. A nice way of doing it. So just something to think about. Okay. How are we going for time, Debs and Amy?
We're good
You've
for
got,
time.
yeah, you're good for time. You've got 25 minutes until we'll have to finish. So I think
Great.
that's all good.
I think we're doing well. Okay, great, guys. Okay, so I put together just a bit of a slide as a thought experiment kind of exercise on very roughly how you do back of the envelope calculations on what kind of system I might want, how much it's going to generate, how much it might save me, and also then how much carbon is that going to save. So I kind of just step this out here, and feel free to take this and have a bit of a play yourself. Okay, so at the top I've got some assumptions. So I've kind of thought about how about we do a 400 watt panels, and that is obviously then 2 kilowatts worth of power of your panels. And from that slide before, 2 kilowatts will generate 4.4 kilowatt hours per day of generation, averaged over the year. And we're just going to look at averages for now. So in terms of assumptions here, I've assumed that I'm on a rate of 30p per kilowatt hour during the day, and that I've worked out I've gone to a retailer that I like, and they pay 15p per kilowatt hour smart export guarantee. So every kilowatt hour that I'm exporting to the grid, it will appear as a line item on my bill, saying thank you very much for a bit of a tuppence. Great. So yeah, there's the assumption there, 2.2 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. And over here, I've assumed that of that energy generated every day, that I'm going to consume 2/3 of it and export 1/3 of it. And I've also used, you probably won't need to look this up, but you can if you like. The carbon intensity of electricity in 2024 is about 125 grams of CO2 per every single kilowatt hour of power generated on the grid UK wide. So that's kind of the number we use to understand carbon savings from solar generation. So with all this information, I've kind of figured out that on a daily basis, on average, of the energy consumed, I'll be saving 96p that I don't need to pay the retailer anymore, and the retailer will be paying me an extra 18p to export that power on average every day. And that's £1.14 every day, which obviously doesn't seem very much. This is quite a small system. But annually in the first year, that's £416. And then you can imagine over 25, 30 years, annual rise in electricity costs, that the savings can get quite significant quite quickly, which is great. And also I did a little carbon calculation here for us too. So that amount of solar in the first year and every year will save about 200 kilograms of solar, which is the same as planting 9 trees every year. And it's the amount of carbon as driving a normal petrol car from London to Inverness and back every year, which is a kind of cool thing to think about. Okay.
Daniel,
Okay.
can
Yes.
we just have 1 or 2 questions there?
Yes, please.
Going back to the panels, we've been asked, do we have a preference for any ethical suppliers for solar panels? Obviously, in the industry, and again, recently, there's been some issues with forced labor, etc. I
Yeah.
don't personally have a preference for ethical, because if you search, if you Google search ethical solar panel manufacturers, it talks about their sustainability accreditations. It doesn't necessarily obviously bring all the bad to light. So I
Yeah.
personally don't have a preference, unfortunately, for you, Gerard. I'm not sure if Daniel does.
No, I don't really either. SunPower and Canadian Solar are both North American companies, if that is a preference or a disincentive at this point. But pretty much all your solar panels are made without human intervention by robots in factories in China. That's kind of just the way it is. Yeah. Actually, something to think about though. I might go away from this and do a bit
have
of
a
a search.
look. Yes, definitely.
You've piqued my
Yeah,
interest, and in the follow-up email, I might put any thoughts in there. So thanks for that question. That's
perfect.
great.
Then another question from Steph. If you could tell her a little bit about inverters versus microinverters, as she's had a quote from an installer using microinverters and not an inverter.
Yeah, great. So I think I was going to talk about that on the next slide, but I should have mentioned it on the inverter slide. So yeah, so basically your standard inverter, your cheap and cheerful average inverter is a string inverter like this one that sits on your wall and connects to 2 strings or 3 strings sometimes of panels, all connected together in series. It's nice, it's easy, it's cheap, it works. If there's no shading, then it's absolutely fine. No real reason to not go that way. However, if you have a complex roof with more than 1 or 2 or 3 kind of, I guess, faces, if you want to have a bit more of a complex install, if you are really interested in monitoring and having panel level monitoring, or the big thing, if you have some serious shading issues, then microinverters or optimizers might be the way to go, or the only way to go. And also, if you don't have any space to fit an inverter on the wall, let's say you're on like a second of 3 flats, and you want to kind of sneak some solar in, microinverters means 1 individual inverter under each panel or split between 2 panels. And then that way you have monitoring on a panel level, and it means that they work all independently from each other. The main downside of a string inverter is that any kind of shading, let's say a chimney, if it shades 1 panel to 20% of the panel being shaded, that whole series, that whole string of panels acts as if it is shaded 20%. And if there's significant shading, then that can really destroy the generation of your system. So that's probably why you've been quoted microinverters. And I guess while we're talking about it, optimizers are kind of similar. You put optimizers underneath panels. If there's shading issues, but not super serious shading issues, you still have your inverter, but optimizers kind of optimize and balance out all the generation between the panels and can manage shading much better, and they work a bit more independently from each other. So there's kind of 2 options to go. Obviously, both a bit more costly. If that answers your question, Steph.
We do have another question from Edward. I'm not sure
Sure.
if you want to go to your next slide first, though, Daniel.
Uh,
Entirely up to you.
no, sure. What's Edward's question? I'm feeling
Edward's actually asking, and probably looking at our lovely background, Edward, that's actually a Viridian in-roof system. He's asking what our thoughts are on in-roof versus on-roof. And then if going in-roof, Viridian versus GSE system. Obviously, it depends, Edward, if you're building your house from scratch, and you can, or you're replacing a roof. Aesthetically, people prefer in-roof. The UK still has a little bit of hesitation looking at solar on roofs. So in-roof is obviously great looking from a point of view in depending on what roof type and what your internal roof type or structure will be. Maintenance could be a problem if you have optimizers, MC4s that need to be replaced. So just bear that in mind that you have allowed access, sufficient access to obviously the underside of panels. The one thing with in-roof is make sure you choose your contractor carefully, because you could end up with obviously major rain ingress, etc. If you are looking for an installer specializing in in-roof, go to the manufacturers, go to Viridian and ask them to recommend an installer in your area, because they have all been through the direct training with the manufacturers. From a preference point of view, I just prefer Viridian. It's a lot sleeker. The GSE is still a little bit fumbly looking on the roof, but really it becomes a preference, obviously, you're not necessarily going to save much by taking roof off to put in roof solar. So it just depends on the circumstances at the time.
Mm. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Debbie. You're much more across that than I am. All right, let's have a bit of a chat about finance, because obviously solar costs money, and there's different ways of managing that. So how much does solar cost? And the short answer is, as you can expect, it absolutely depends on so many factors, as we kind of spoke about before: your roof, how many stories your house is, what products you end up selecting, what added warranties you look at, the quality of the installation partner, how steep your roof is, a bunch of different factors. But generally, you're probably looking at somewhere from 3,000 on the bottom end for a small system, up to a big and fancy microinverter system on a third story, up to 10. And then batteries, you're probably looking to double the cost of your solar system overall if you want to put on battery storage. So we're probably not going to talk about that today. But if there's enough appetite and people are interested, maybe we could have a follow-up session, or I could send through some links after this. Okay, so we'll talk about financing solar in a second, but firstly, just what kind of grants and subsidies are there out there in the market right now? Short answer is not loads, but this is basically where we're at right now. So until I think 2027, there's no VAT on solar materials or installs, which is great. So the price that you get from the installer, that's already accounted for. There's a scheme, a national scheme called the Eco4 scheme, which is for low-income households. If your household earns under 31,000 per year, and you receive one of the benefits from the listed on the Ofgem website, and you have quite a poor energy performance certificate grade of your property. And apart from that, the other main benefit of solar is that if you switch your energy supplier to one that is smart export guarantee kind of approved, that's signed up for that scheme, that you will get paid to export any of your excess solar. So most of the big players in the retail space are SEG approved, and one of the things that you, as the resident, is your responsibility to shop around for an energy supplier that you like their smart export guarantee and their retail rate for the energy that you're also buying. It's a good opportunity to just have a look at what's out there anyway, because we often get slack and to stay with the same supplier for ages, even though it might not be the best for us. But yes, that is something that you will actively need to do yourself if you want to get that export. While we're on that topic, what will you need to provide them as proof? So unless, I believe, Debs, you're with Octopus, you will have to show a MCS certificate of install from an MCS certified installer, and we're actually going to talk about that on the next slide. And as well, you will need to have a proof of DNO, I guess, application or acceptance. And that's UK Power Networks is the distributor in Southeast London. And basically these two forms, and this is as boring as this whole thing gets, I promise. If you're installing a solar system under 3.6 kilowatts, your installer will simply notify the DNO that they're installing it using a D96 form. If you want to install a system over 3.6 kilowatts, your installer needs to lodge that form first, and you need to wait for approval before installing, and really make sure that happens, because if they come back and say there's no capacity on the grid or something like that, and you've already paid your deposit and they're already installing it, it could get quite tricky there. So definitely check if you're installing a bigger system, check that has all been approved with your installer. But again, they will be leading the charge on that. And then you will also need to have a smart meter installed if you don't already, and that has an MPAN number, an MPAN number attached to it. And that's all you need to then get the smart export guarantee. Grants and subsidies apart from that, there is this thing called the Solar Together program, which is kind of a bulk buy scheme nationally for discounted rates for set solar systems. I had a look earlier today. There are none of the Southeast London boroughs are signed up, and No word on whether they will in the future. So maybe something to watch, but I wouldn't hold out on it if you're keen on solar sooner rather than never.
Personally, I would stay away from it just due to the
Mm,
bad press and the bad installs they've had
yeah,
over the last couple of years. Rather go local installer,
yeah,
registered MCS. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. And then there's this new thing, Warm Homes Plan, announced by Labor, which is again for low-income households. Not really a lot of mumblings on whether solar will be included in that, but something to watch anyway as something coming down the pipe in terms of sustainability in general. Okay, so it's a few different ways of financing a solar system. You can pay cash, and with a cash payment and in any solar quote you get, they will provide you based off your energy bills. If you provide it to them and the solar modeling, they will give you I guess a cash flow chart of your savings over the lifetime of the system and also what your payback period will be, which is obviously how long it will take for you to make your money back that you invested in the solar if you pay cash. Obviously, if you have the capital up front to pay for it, this is the cheapest and quickest way to go. And you're probably, depending on how expensive your install is and how much power you use and how much you pay for it, you're probably looking at a 6 to 10 year payback period. Which, if you think about it, getting a 10% return on a savings account or any kind of account would be pretty nice right now, wouldn't it? So you actually do get it's a pretty good return on investment for solar, which is not something that people think about as much as they should, I don't think. Right, green mortgages are another great option. There's a lot of banks out there that if you hit certain criteria, so if you have X, Y, and Z energy efficiency measures in your house, or you have solar, then they will give you a discounted home loan rate, which is great, and then you can leverage that home loan to invest in the solar. Also, a lot of banks offer discounted rates for personal loans, specifically for renewables, which is great, and I've listed obviously some there. And there's also specialist lenders that only work with solar, and your contractor, whoever it is, will have their own in-house or third-party offerings that they can walk you through. That may be the easiest to administer, but may not be the best rate, but it may make sense for you at the time. So there's loads of options out there. And I guess for any kind of financing, if you think about it, just look at how much you're saving per year. And if your repayments is less than how much you're saving, that's a pretty good deal if you ask me. Okay. So this next slide is generally, I guess this is kind of we've got all the information we need. Now, how do we choose an installer and a contractor? Which is really kind of the most important thing, I think. And this is something probably a sheet to refer back to, and especially this link to the contractor registry. Because as I say at the top, solar is a long-term relationship and you should pick your partner well. I was thinking before of analogies. I don't know if it's quite right, but be like going to the rescue shelter and picking up a dog that was really cute, but not knowing anything about its background or where it came from or what various traumas or diseases it may have. So picking an installation partner and the quality of the labor and the install and the warranties that go along with it is really going to make or break how successful your project is and the longevity of your solar. So really doing it right once at the start, is really, really important. And if someone is ringing you up on the phone and saying they'll come and install solar tomorrow, probably steer clear. Okay, so I'm going to start on the right. Firstly, ideally get 3 quotes. Then you can kind of look at the averages, play them off each other, understand why they're coming from different approaches, and kind of get a general sense if they're all in the ballpark. It's just good due diligence. What kind of installers should you go for? You should go for Microgeneration Certification Scheme certified installers, the MCS scheme. And there's a link here to that registry so you can find installers in your area. And ideally, you will also have installers that are members of the Renewable Energy Consumer Code, the RECC. And then this is all on top of obviously being qualified electricians, which should be assumed, hopefully. Great. So let's say you've gone out to market, you've got 3 quotes for your house, and they come back with a bunch of fine print and a whole bunch of different information on them. I put some screenshots down here of just kind of vaguely what they might look like, with a bunch of environmental and savings and technical information on them. Some things to really look out for are listed over here on the left. So how about we just go through them? So firstly, really have a look at how long their workmanship and installation warranty is. And really, you'd be wanting to look at people that are backing themselves for 2 years, ideally 5. In Australia, a lot of companies have a 10-year installation warranty, which is great. And then to the same point, there's some contractors out there that will offer an insurance-backed warranty of 5 or up to 10 years, which means that even if they go out of business, that they're still insured to honour any warranty claims on workmanship up to 5 or 10 years, which is awesome. So these kind of warranties are over and above anything going wrong with the inverter itself or the panels. And another really important one is deposit. Do they have a deposit protection scheme? Sometimes with solar, unfortunately, the market changes very rapidly. People pay deposits for systems to get installed. The company goes out of business or they come out to site and the information was wrong and they can't install because of asbestos or some other reason. In a lot of cases, if there's no deposit protection scheme or you haven't paid for as much as you can on a credit card, you'll lose that deposit. And that really puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth and is really crap. So really just try to avoid that if you can. And also having an installer come out and do a site visit to your house before signing on the dotted line is always a good idea. Again, double check the inclusions and exclusions. Is that final price on the quote the actual true price you're going to end up paying? Is scaffolding included? That kind of thing. I put in here bird netting because I'm seeing this a lot recently, that pigeons have a habit of nesting under people's solar panels and causing a dirty mess and deteriorating the quality of the roof and causing flooding over gutters and grass to grow and a bunch of stuff. So if it's about £15 a meter to install the netting that just kind of stops pigeons getting in under the lip of your panels between your roof, something to think about. It's not normally standard, but could be a good idea. And then here, do they have their own kind of in-house designers? Do they do everything in-house? Do they have their own installation team or do they subcontract it out to whoever happens to be in the area? And do those subcontractors also have MCS accreditation? So definitely something to check when you're on the phone to them or you're on the emails.
Hi, Daniel. Just sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. Just let you know this 5 minutes towards the end of our slot.
Okay,
There's
great.
lots and lots of information and interest, so I think there definitely will be some follow-up sessions, everyone.
Yeah, for
So
sure. I mean,
please
yeah,
do.
I'm happy to stay on a few extra minutes, but also this is the last
Of
slide.
course.
So
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
okay, thanks, Amy. Cool. Just another thing to think about. How local are they? Do they have any local technicians available for call outs if anything goes wrong? Yeah, Debs and I were talking earlier today, and we were talking about how Eon and Octopus and a lot of companies now are getting into the solar game, and they have this big, I guess, national presence, and they will have their central office wherever it is, and they will farm out jobs to whoever they can, and kind of usually pay them rock bottom to pump out as many jobs in a day as possible. So yeah, we would suggest potentially going for a more locally rooted company with local presence that has all the right accreditations might be the best and most ethical way to go if that works for you. And also ask them if you have a slate roof, how much experience do you have working with slate? You know, do you have any references for any slate jobs you've done recently? Can I speak to them? Do you have a case study on your website I can look at? Things like that. If they've never installed on slate before, maybe don't go with them. Things like that, you know. And then just kind of due diligence online checks. Look up the company registry online, look at the directors, see if there's any news stories about them or anything dodgy on the company registry, and kind of look at how long they've been in business. Obviously, the longer the better. And also online reviews on blogs and on Google. Most companies have loads of Google reviews of different people that are either happy or dissatisfied customers. So definitely worth having a check at those things as well.
Daniel, we do
yes.
have a few questions before we
All
need
right.
to come to an end.
Great. Well, let's do it.
Helen, can we do your battery question last, just in case we don't have time? Because as we said, if there's enough interest, we will do a battery a sort of workshop like this one.
Yeah.
So just to get to Edward's comment, the quotes he's seen, in his
Sorry, Yvonne.
opinion, are over optimistic financial model with a high rate of inflation and no cost of capital. Is this
Yeah.
the MCS model? It seems pretty poor to me. Edward, what you need to remember about the MCS modeling that your installer has to abide by, they have to show you certain criteria that is part of their MCS accreditation. The MCS model is in terms of not only financial but production and generation, is taken on a central point in the middle of the UK and based on that calculation. So it's not completely accurate for particular areas. And obviously from a financial model, you can literally sort of work that out yourself based on the savings. But remember, the MCS model is a generic model. You can ask the installer to give you a specific solar program that they use if there's a different financial model, but they do have to give you the MCS model to make sure that their paperwork is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And all companies kind of have their own way of representing things and tweaking things, and just looking at the kind of your year one savings and generation yourself, and even using ChatGPT or any online calculator yourself, you can get a bit of an idea. And if you're looking at a few different quotes, maybe just be kind of, looking at the generation in year one rather than, predicting anything 20, 25, 30 years in the future is going to be a little bit of a slight guessing game, educated guessing game, sure, but there's going to be variation there. You may not want to hang your hat on entirely, if that makes sense.
Then Helen has just mentioned, obviously, an iBoost solar diverter, which is a great option to have if you have that excess power from your solar. Also asking, do any panels melt snow? And then related to panels, Steph is asking, would regular solar panels on a pitch roof need maintenance, assuming that there is bird netting? Obviously, Steph, I'm not from the UK, I'm from South Africa. We believe in solar panel maintenance. We believe in cleaning solar panels. The UK takes the stance that the rain will wash off the dirt. The rain actually creates dust. So it's a good idea to watch your generation. If you see a lull in generation over the same time period, over a year or two, you can look at getting a solar company out to obviously clean your panels. They shouldn't need any other maintenance, as you saying, you obviously have netting. And then do any panels melt snow? Unfortunately, no. They don't generate, they obviously will, but it won't be from the panel side. It'll be from whatever sunlight or light is protruding, obviously, onto the panels, but the panels themselves won't melt snow.
Yeah, me obviously coming from Australia, I'm not versed in the snow side of things either. If you live in a one-story ground story house, if it hasn't rained for a while in the summer and you get kind of a big rain and there's some pollution and dirt in the air, there's no reason you can't you get a hose and wash the dust off your solar panels. You don't need to turn it off or anything, just go for it.
Then last question, if there is time, from Steph. She's asking regarding battery, is it sensible to start with a smaller capacity given the major cost and technology developing fast for now and then try add more later? Was that a bad idea? Steph, it depends what battery as well, because some are stackable, some aren't stackable. So you need to obviously consider space, price per battery, because you may just double up in battery, but the price may be more than double compared to a battery of the same brand, but a bigger size. So just have a look at the options. Or rather say no battery, we'll change our lifestyle a little bit to incorporate the solar generation and see how that savings work for us, and then install battery later. It's also an option.
Yeah, I'm also I don't know if people drive or not. I don't drive, but getting in a few years, having an electric vehicle with a battery will then be your home battery as well. Having a movable battery that you can drive around in, and just saving up for that that kind of inevitable future, it might be something to think about as well.
They do have 1 or 2 of those programs on the go already in the UK.
Yeah. If there's any other questions, feel free to email us afterwards. There's some QR codes there to have a look. And so we'd circulate this presentation afterwards, and our email addresses and phone numbers. So happy to chat again about batteries or anything else. But yeah, thank you for the whistle stop tour. There was a lot of information, but I enjoyed myself.